You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Oh, welcome again. And we're delighted to be joined by another man who genuinely needs no introduction. So again, I'm not going to give him one. Richard Thompson. Yeah. We're just so excited to have you here.
We are. We're thrilled.
Well, I want an introduction. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I've been listening to this man's records. I worked it out the other day since I was about 17, I think. And in all that time, I can honestly say he's never let me down. Never let me down. And nor has he let me down when he's finally gone into print with his book Beeswing, and that's what we're here to talk about. So where are you, Richard? You're in London.
I'm in London, yes. I'm in North London. I'm in Hampstead.
Right.
And, as we speak.
And is that where you've been during lockdown? Or have you been all over the place?
I mean, I only got to the UK last week. And it was unbelievably difficult to get in the country.
Right.
Where were you? Were you marooned somewhere?
No, I was in I was in New Jersey, pretty much, which is my American base, But I guess I was there for about the last 6 months, actually. At some point, you need a change of scenery. And I wanted to come over and do some promotion like this.
Of course.
And so, I've, it's so many vaccinations and tests to get into Britain. But now I'm free. I'm de-quarantined, or whatever the expression is.
Oh, good.
Yes, good.
To de-quarantine.
Right. Well, let's talk about the book. Which is, it's the early part of your life and career, I suppose. Yeah. You tell us about you. Start by talking about your family, because there were quite a few people, entertainers in your extended family of one kind or another. What kind of music was in your house, when you were growing up as a boy?
Well, it was mostly records. My mum sang like Vera Lynn. She could kind of do Vera Lynn very well. She looked like Vera Lynn. Okay. And she had a very nice singing voice. Just sang around the house. I mean, she wasn't on stage or anything. My dad was a sort of a bad amateur guitar player / policeman. Not many people can say that. And
used to play Louis Armstrong records, is that right? And do a kind of running commentary you mentioned in the book?
Yeah. Well, that was the nice thing. My father had, in among the crap, and I do mean crap, there was some nice, jazz records. There was Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and of interest to me as an inspiring guitarist, Django Reinhardt and Les Paul records. So that was great, And then from the other wall of my bedroom, coming through the other wall, with my sister's records, the Jerry Lee and the Buddy Holly, lots of Buddy Holly. She was a huge Buddy Holly fan. So that was nice. My father also, we're Scottish, so we had Scottish dance music. We had Jimmy Shand, and we had. Some of my earliest memories are of pipers, but bagpipes up on when we went on holiday to Scotland. Some guy just standing up on a hill, playing, and that incredible outdoor thing where the wind kind of swirls the music around. It kind of phases it around. Interesting mixture, growing up, and I think a lot of that stayed with me, really. But the rock and roll was the hip stuff. That was the stuff.
You identified the idea of a guitar hero quite early on, didn't you? You were very attracted to, I think it was Joe Brown really caught your attention.
Joe Brown, well, yeah, he was local, he was homegrown, and he was technically very good, Joe, I think. And you'd see him on, I think it was Oh Boy, one of the early rock and roll shows. That was nice. But everybody was playing a guitar. All the rock and roll heroes were at least posing with one. Elvis had one slung around his neck, and so did Tommy Steele. So I started asking for a guitar for Christmas, and I got fobbed off with little plastic toys. They did not take me seriously until I was about 11, and then a real guitar turned up in the house, and I commandeered it, and no one else got their hands on it.
I have to ask you: did you do the thing that the rest of us pretenders did, which was pose with a tennis racket in front of a mirror? Pretending
Absolutely. Yes, I did that.
It's an important stage to go through.
I think it's very, very important that you at least, you get the look down before you get your hands on an actual guitar. And a tennis racket, as we all know, is very similarly shaped and it can almost do the job. In fact, if it was strung in a different way, you might even be able to play it. All this stringing it, grid-wise is completely wrong. You need to string it long-wise.
Yeah. So you talk about school, and we get the impression that you didn't do that well at school, and that you're really largely self-educated, as it were, very much like Springsteen and Dylan. And musically, apart from Davy Graham and Peter Green and Howlin' Wolf and the various other things that any aspiring guitarist would be listening to, how did you come across all that interesting, quite esoteric music, Eastern music and flamenco and stuff that that influenced your playing? How did you find those?
Well, funny. I think anything that you heard in those days was exciting and new. So if you heard flamenco, I had a flamenco album that my parents bought for me because I was taking classical guitar lessons, and we did a bit of flamenco in that. We did a bit of rasgueando and all that sort of stuff. Other stuff just sort of turned up. I mean, I took sitar lessons at one point, 1967. Why
That's
not?
Amazing.
As everybody else did.
Inspired by what was that? Was that a George Harrison thing, or how did that happen?
Inspired by the fact that one of my managers, Todd Lloyd, owned a sitar.
Yeah.
And he'd sit and play and said, I'm not getting very far with this. You have a go. So he came over to my house, and I thought, well, this is fun. And then Todd said, I've got this friend, Nazir, who teaches Oriental Studies at London University. You should go and take lessons with him. So I thought, oh, great, So I get on the train, and there's Andy Summers in the carriage. I said, where are you going? He says, oh, I'm going for my sitar lesson. So am I. so Andy and I were in a sort of a class of two, but Nazir also had these wonderful house parties every weekend. He'd have these incredible concerts of visiting Indian musicians. I mean, the cream of visiting Indian musicians would just do this little house concert in his front room, and so stuff that you'd be unaware of otherwise. You would not know this was going on. It would just do this little circuit around the UK, playing to Indian communities. So it wasn't something you'd see at the Albert Hall or anything. No. So that was very enriching, And other stuff, I mean, you heard classical music, and you heard jazz, and you heard a pretty good diet of stuff, There was a great, speaking of Indian, there was this great band called Indo Jazz Fusions.
Oh, yes.
Which is like half a jazz band and half an Indian ensemble. And they were absolutely terrific. That was wonderful stuff. That was, world music, fusion music at a very early point in history.
So you say you ran across people like Andy Summers when you were getting started. And you also, earlier than that, you played in the band with Hugh Cornwell.
Yes.
Of the Stranglers. What do you remember of that band?
Well, Hugh wasn't doing too much strangling in those days, but he did... quite a lot later on. That was our school band. Hugh and I were friends, and he wanted to learn to play the bass, so he could be in a band. And I suppose I taught him to play the bass, and then we added another William Ellis kid, Nick Jones, who used to write for the Melody Maker, the son of Max Jones.
Max Jones' son. That's right.
So we went out as a sort of a power trio.
Playing what then? What kind of were they covers?
Oh, it was all covers. Yeah, we were playing, R&B, the things that the Who were also covering, things like the Daddy Rolling Stone, songs like that. But Nick also had access to the Melody Maker 45s that came in every week, the demos.
Oh, really?
That they reviewed. And so he'd find, Jack of Diamonds by Ben Carruthers and the Deep, which we used to do in those days. We did a song called The Real Thing, which I think was a Kiki D, early Kiki D B-side or something. So we found some obscure stuff, which was pretty good for a school band of, 15, 16-year-olds.
Right. So you were spending a lot of time, as you got older, going into London whenever possible and seeing all the bands that you could see. And Were you're keeping an eye on the guitar players particularly?
Well, probably, yeah. Well, I was open to anything, but there were some very good guitar players, mostly blues-based guitar players. Eric Clapton, obviously, Peter Green, I thought was a great player. Jeff Beck, playing with the Yardbirds, were all pretty impressive, at the time. So I was learning a lot from them, although I didn't continue down that road for too long anyway.
Right. You saw Jimi Hendrix at one point. You write about making you realize, I'm sure it did for a lot of guitarists, actually, making you realize that you had to think very carefully about what it is you were doing because you needed some kind of originality. I mean, he had quite an impact on you, didn't he?
I think he did, yeah, and on everybody else. I think it was own up time for a lot of guitar players because you suddenly had this guy who could upstage you at every turn. If first of all, he could play better than anybody else. But plus, he could play with his teeth and have sex with the guitar and all kinds of stuff like that. So, you were never going to upstage Jimmy. And for me, I thought, well, I want to be something a bit different. I want to be something a bit more original. So I'm going to try and have a different style from these other, London-based guitar players.
Right. So you become a member of Fairport Convention, which is a kind of North London suburban band, isn't it? It's formed out of people you bump into locally, and you very quickly make some kind of impression in London in that scene, to the extent that I couldn't believe this in the book. You're invited to Paul McCartney's birthday party, and tell us what you did.
Well, I got this nice sort of psychedelic invitation in the post. Sandy got one as well. For some reason, that they picked us out of Fairport, and they probably invited people from the other bands around town as well. And I thought, Beatles, bit of a pop band. Do I really want to go? If it was, if it was Bob Dylan's birthday party or Joni Mitchell's, I'd be there in a flash. But the Beatles, I mean, the records sound good, but is it art? So snob that I was, and that's incredibly snobbish in retrospect. I decided not to go. I think I made some lame excuse that I had a dinner date or something. But it was a bit lame. If you ask me now, I think I'd go.
Right. Did you regret it soon after? You must have done.
Not soon after. I regret it now. It's taken 50 years to regret it.
But there was an amazing snobbery about folk music at the time, wasn't there? That idea that you were slightly above and slightly better than a lot of the competition.
Well, you had that in folk music, and then on top of that, you had the extra snobbishness of Fairport. So we felt ourselves, removed from, the general scene, if you like, and a bit special. We were really into lyrics far more than any other band around London.
Yeah.
We loved our lyrics, and if we were going to do a cover, we were going to do an obscure cover where we're going to find something.
Or you're going to do a cover and do it in French, like you did.
Exactly, yeah. If we found a Dylan song, then it'd be, from the Basement tapes, which no one else had heard at the time that we found them. So we like to be obscure in our thievery of covers.
So you talk very touchingly about Sandy Denny, and what was it that made her such an exceptional singer? And what did you mean when you said you were never quite sure which Sandy Denny you're dealing with? You talked about her personality.
Yeah, I suppose she's volatile. She could change moods very, very quickly. She goes from high to low very quickly, and vice versa. She could be very, very funny, really funny, and really depressed and upset. Burst into tears at a moment's notice. You never quite knew when. And I think a lot of that wrought emotion is almost like Gustav Mahler kind of emotional seesaw went into her singing. So her singing had this extraordinary emotion to it, but a kind of a rare kind of emotion that I can't compare to anybody else. She really inhabited a song. And once Sandy sang a song, you'd say, well, that's it. What's the point of anybody else singing it? She's absolutely nailed it. And she'd nail it first time through. That was the amazing thing was, if I took a song to Fairport and Sandy sang it, the first time she sang it, she would understand the song. She would understand what the song was talking about, and she'd invest it with exactly the right amount of emotion, and that was it. She'd done it. It was finished.
Well, there were various key moments, like A Sailor's Life, when she brought that in, and you all started playing that, and that was a really old folk song, and that was a kind of new direction, wasn't it? You immediately followed her lead and tried to work out an arrangement for it. Yeah,
because we had so little time to rehearse when Sandy joined the band, where we were playing, all the time, that we'd slide her into songs, and we'd also take some of her songs that she'd been singing around the folk circuit and just wrap ourselves around those. And she's backstage, Southampton University, and we're just sitting there backstage jamming, and Sandy starts singing A Sailor's Life, and we said, oh, that's a lovely arrangement. That's beautiful. Well, why don't we just do it tonight? And we'll see what happens. I mean, we don't really know what we're going to do, but let's start off, a cappella, out of time. And then we'll kind of bring in a rhythm, and we'll see what happens. So we did it that night, and it sounded pretty good. So we said to Joe Boyd, we need to go in the studio to record this. And we brought in Dave Swarbrick as well on fiddle. And it was first take, basically, was the one that kind of nailed it.
Do you think that there's something to be said for the fact that in those days people worked so quickly that you couldn't kind of second guess yourself? You've gone on with it and you just moved on to the next thing. Was that a good thing?
I think it was good and bad. I think that there could have been times, should have been times when we spent a little bit more time on records. I think that became more of a problem a bit later, like when I was working with Linda, where we had really less time, less budget. In Fairport, Joe would actually give us as much time as we needed on the whole. But it was still a quick process. I think you weren't expected to spend a long time in the studio. I think it was still seen as, a few takes. Well, okay, that's fine. That'll do, lads. That's good enough.
It still staggers me, and we were talking about it the other day, that these three records I'm holding up all came out the same year.
Yes, they did, 1969. Well, what we did in our holidays, I think we finished recording in December of the year before. So it came out in January.
January 69.
And then that one came out in May, I think, of that year. Well, yeah, and then Legion came out in I think, November. Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it?
Incredible work rate. It's astonishing.
It's astonishing. Well, we didn't go into the studio saying, okay, we're going to make a record, we're going to make an album. We just go in all the time and cut a couple of tracks and then cut a few more. Sometimes after gigs, we go into the studio, like at midnight and cut for a few hours. So it was a constant process. Whenever we had a day off, we just go in the studio and do some more recording. So it was almost an unconscious thing that, now we have enough for an album. It was just this very slow development of records as we slowly got through that process.
Yeah. I love all the stuff about life in the van. You're constantly touring. It's not true now, modern musicians, but you spend so much time in a van going up and down the motorway, and you're playing these kind of mile-melting games of kind of I Spy and games with number plates and talking about Molesworth, all that. And was that a big part of the band experience? It was really, wasn't it? And am I right in thinking that's some of your fondest memories in the book?
Well, they are. It was part of the bonding process, I suppose, really. Yeah. The fact that it was usually too uncomfortable to actually sleep in the van. You're in a transit van with those sort of rows of seats. It's not like you've got nice airplane seats. That came later, where we got a slightly better seating arrangement. But you couldn't really nod off very easily, so you had to think of something to do, and we just played these ridiculous games, really.
You invented kind of words out of number plates.
Absolutely, yeah. And the word unhalf-bricking came from one such episode. Right. Where we're playing this game called Super Ghosts, which was James Thurber and Dorothy Parker, where that we used to sit around playing this game, where you think of a letter, but you have to have a word in mind. And then you add to the front or back of that letter, still having to have a word in mind, but you must never complete the word. So, so you get to BRIC, and what are you going to do then? So something's okay. Half brick. So I'll put an FBRIC. So now you can put the K on if you want to, but then everyone else has to know that you're thinking of half brick, which isn't the word anyway. It's actually two words, but we didn't know at the time. And then it got to half brick in without the G. So Sandy put like an N in front for unhalf bricking. At which point, the game sort of dissolved in hysteria.
That's brilliant. That's where they derived from. That's amazing.
Yeah.
There is obviously the tragic incident in the middle of that year, 1969, which is the van crash on the M1, which killed Martin Lamble, who was the drummer, and Jeannie Franklin, who was your friend at the time, and this happens in the middle of this incredibly busy year, and you obviously spend time in hospital, and then you go to the United States, and then you come back, and then you all go down to you get it together in the country again, and make Legion leave. Do you think the fact that you were relatively resilient in bouncing back from that terrible tragedy because you were quite young?
I suppose we were young. Well, we bounced back, but did we? I mean, I'm not sure that we processed what happened very well. They didn't send you to therapy in those days. You didn't do counselling or something. We didn't grieve properly, I don't think. And I think the after effects of that were long lasting for Fairport. I think for a couple of years we were still in a state of shock. We were kind of derailed, made bad decisions. Maybe Sandy wouldn't have left. Maybe Ashley wouldn't have left. Maybe the band would have been more stable, stayed together longer. So we were all really just off kilter for a while after that. I kind of wonder now why someone didn't deal with that. Look at us and say, these guys are having a hard time. We should do something for them. But I think it was the post-World War II.
It's interesting, isn't
stiff upper lip stuff.
It is.
It is. There wasn't that much. On with it.
There wasn't that much of a difference between us and our parents, really.
No. Well, it was the Duke of Edinburgh stuff. Just come on, get on with it. Come on.
Yes,
it is.
And as we know, I mean, but people really suffered in the two world wars without any of that namby-pamby, therapy stuff.
Now, you played America, in that period, supporting various people like Jethro Tull and Traffic. What did America make of Fairport Convention?
Yes, it's such unusual music to be playing, before a Traffic gig. What do those audiences make that 200-year-old folk songs kind of amped up?
They didn't really get it, I don't think. They would greet us politely and somewhat in a stoned fashion. It wasn't enthusiastic. I think they just thought, another band. We'll get through them to get to the good stuff. I think the best response that we got was black audiences who really saw what we were doing was not ripping off the blues or R&B. So I think that they appreciated the fact that we were trying to not piggyback onto black culture. That was interesting. And then when we played the Philadelphia Folk Festival, that was a real like a home audience for us. We had a fantastic response at Philadelphia Folk Fest, where like the entire audience was dancing. I mean, 10,000, 20,000 people. Everybody was up and just dancing. That was extraordinary. So that was really our target audience, I think. Otherwise, Americans didn't get it, didn't understand it.
Right. I thought it was so interesting, going back very slightly, that you talking about the effect of music from Big Pink by the band, which was a kind of synthesis of American roots music and folk and blues and Appalachian and jazz and all that, and that had a big effect on you, didn't it? As a group, in some sense, you decided to go off and produce a kind of British or English equivalent of that.
Well, exactly, yeah. I think Big Pink and the subsequent album were just so good, and almost what Fairport were aiming for, in a sense, was that kind of contemporary roots approach, where you're writing these really good songs in the style of this root synthesis. And I think Fairport thought, well, we can't go any further as British imitators of American styles. Well, we have to do our own thing. That was the point where we really just have to shove ourselves in a different direction.
Right. So Sandy leaves, and you're in the group with Dave Swarbrick for a short while. Mm-hmm. But then you pretty much decide, I'm leaving this group, and you were never in a group ever again. Is that because you decided, I can't be in a group? It requires too many compromises.
That's a good question. Well, I've been in groups since I was about 12, and I think I just burnt out on bands, and I think I wanted to develop writing a bit more, and I wanted to see where that took me. And for a while, I was happy to be, well, you'd say I wasn't in groups, but I played in bands of other people. I played in Ian's band, I played in Sandy's band. And then I suppose Linda and I worked as a duo, so then we were more sort of at the helm of a musical entity. And then I was pretty much solo, and I think once you're solo, it's nice to be solo, and it's nice to do projects sometimes, to do temporary affiliations with other musicians. But at some point, I think your ego wants you to be doing your own thing. I'm sure it's an ego thing.
Right. There's a very interesting, you had lots of interesting kind of philosophies and perspectives about folk music. And one is that that the folk world, you claim, you feel is rooted in jealousy. That anybody who breaks big has somehow betrayed this egalitarian rule. Why do you think people were like that? You talk about, Billy Connolly and people suddenly having all the success. There's a lot of resentment, wasn't there?
Yeah. I just found it surprisingly bitchy and backstabbing after the real camaraderie of the London underground scene at the time.
Yeah.
You felt a real kinship with Blossom Toes and Family, and Arthur Brown, all these people. I mean, they were just nice people that they'd support you to the end. I mean, it was just a really nice community. The folk music community, on the surface, it was absolutely all of that. But there'd be this kind of bitchy element to it as well, which really shocked me. I was
you kind of sold out. You let people down.
Absolutely, yeah. And you think of the people who started out on the folk scene, like Isla St. Clair and Barbara Dixon, Billy Connolly, Jasper Carrott. Were seen as almost like betrayers, of some vague socialist ideal that was never exactly fully explained to me.
So nobody could have had a chance to have a go at Nick Drake, really, because he could have achieved so much more, And you talk about him and about John Martin, and I thought it was really interesting, with great affection. But is it fair to say that neither of them developed, as you did, this brilliant way of projecting and presenting yourself and performing on stage? And was that part of the reason why they didn't reach the audiences as big as they could have done?
Well, I think they're different cases. Nick just didn't play many gigs. I mean, he didn't play live that much because I think he was shy, and I think in some way he felt he wasn't in control of the auditorium somehow. So somebody coughed, and it was a bit Chick Corea. So somebody coughed, and it would put him off. He probably did like 6 gigs in his life. I mean, speaking of folk clubs, Nick probably played the Cambridge University Folk Club like twice or 3 times. I don't know how many times. But other than that, I mean, he hardly played at all. When his album came out in America, A&M Records had a cardboard cutout of Nick at the record launch because they couldn't get him to come over and play. So they put the record on with a cardboard cutout of Nick. And that was about the summation of his stage presence. I thought he was very charismatic. On the one time I saw him on stage, I thought he was really had this charisma about him because he was tall and handsome, and he was kind of interesting to watch, So if he could have just, overcome whatever it was that was stopping him playing live, I think he could have done really well. And you don't have to talk a lot on stage. You don't have to be that outgoing person as John Martin was. John had talked 19 to the dozen between songs, and probably there was more banter than there was actual playing because he'd be tuning up endlessly as well. So he'd be telling jokes and laughing and tuning up. And that'd be about 7 minutes, and then a song would be 3 minutes, and then there'd be another 7 minutes of tuning up and laughing, and but it was fun. It was fun to watch, and I thought John was really good on stage. I mean, he really played well on stage. He really projected well. If Nick had stuck at it, who knows? But very contrasting musicians.
I've got to ask you about this record, Richard, because I love this record. This is your first solo record.
That's the fourth one. You're the fourth person who bought it.
Oh, right. So go on, because this is legendarily unsuccessful, commercially unsuccessful record, isn't it? Which I can't help is partly connected with the image on the cover.
I hope so. I hope that's part of its
unique charm.
Non-success. Yeah, the image on the cover, that was a place called Pampersford Hall. The Island Records art department did drag me out there for the photo shoot. A very eccentric place. Hector Binney was the guy who owned the house. This fabulous collection of Oriental porcelain and stuff, continental porcelain. Well, that record, it's my first solo record. I sort of like some of it. I don't like the singing. The singing is really not very good. It's quite a reputation among some people, and disappointingly for me, some people say that's my favorite record of yours. And I think, really, I've been working here for 50 years, and that's the one you like best. Holy cow! It was notoriously the worst selling album in Warner Brothers history.
Yes.
For various reasons. The cover may have contributed to that, I grant you. But also, I think the music was obscure. It was eccentric. I was trying to kind of state a kind of an intention of style, I think, with that record. I was trying to say, this is the way contemporary music should be. It should be very traditionally based. It should be expressive of all these traditional cultures, but somehow it was a bit too eccentric for most people, and almost too eccentric for me.
So that when you made the first,
you've got them all, haven't you? My goodness, great! What's a library you have there?
I literally have them all. But anyway,
vinyl. Yeah.
No. This record, I was intrigued by. It's widely regarded as one of the great records, and pops up in people's top hundreds and all this kind of thing. But at the time you made it, didn't come out, did it?
The Island shelved it, didn't they? Was it a year or so before it came out?
It was at least a year. It was something like a year and a half. It was an A&R thing. We had an A&R man who I will not mention. Who didn't like it. He was more of an R&B person, and he just thought it was a bad record. So he sat on it, and when he left, and Richard Williams became my A&R, Richard said, what's this record? Why is it sitting in the can here? And he listened to it, and he said, this is good. We should put it out. So change of A&R, and suddenly everything became rosy again at Island Records. It did not bad. If the single hadn't come out at Christmas, it probably would have done better, and we would have had a higher profile for that record.
Right.
There's a wonderful bit where you talk about you and Linda and the children moving out to Suffolk, and it's a kind of hippie dream that you're going to get this plot of land and you're going to build out buildings made of wattle and daub, and you won't need the national grid, you won't need electricity, you can generate all your own. And actually, you didn't know anything at all about farming, did you?
No.
So at what point did you think you might have been a little overambitious?
Well, we're a bunch of townies. There's this Sufi community. It was actually Norfolk first. Then I moved to Suffolk after that. But I think we thought we were going to build this village, and it was going to be self-sufficient. It was going to be off the national grid. We're going to have our own currency. I mean, all kinds of ideas.
Wow.
Not uncommon in the 1970s. I mean,
absolutely. No, everyone was doing it.
We laughed. I see you laughing, but actually, it was lots of people were thinking the same kinds of ideas. Yes. So, and it was a kind of disaster in that sense. The place that we moved to basically had one toilet. That was the first obstacle. So we were digging sort of latrine trenches and things to try and find places for people to send their sewage, if you like. And then we had 40 sheep, and the sheep got blowfly. If you let the grass grow too long, if you put sheep in a field where the grass is too long, the blowfly can jump off onto their backs. And they start laying their eggs on the backs of the sheep, and we didn't know yet. You had to dip the sheep to stop this happening. So then we had to do sheep dipping and all this sort of stuff. And then we thought, really, our skills are more, going to Sainsbury's than having to disinfect sheep. This is not really fast. So I think we backed off slowly from all these wonderful idealistic ideas. Yeah.
Do you think your identification with Sufism, do you think it commercially had any effect on your career?
Well, it could only have a negative effect, I'm sure. It probably didn't help, but it was still the 70s. I mean, I think in the 70s, you didn't really care about commercialism as such. You thought... we make albums. Everyone's an album band who's worth anything. If you're a prog rock band, if you're Yes, then it's about the album and not the single. If you're Traffic, it's about the album, not the single. Although they stuck out singles, that wasn't really the point. It was to be an album band, and then you tour the states and in stadiums and become mega. It's sort of the Pink Floyd model or the Who model, if you like. So that didn't, I think we weren't thinking along those lines at all. We just thought, well, this is the music we make, and if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't.
Right. And you went off at one point, which I didn't know actually, and you worked in an antique shop, didn't you? Is that right?
Yeah.
What was that like? And what happened when people came in and recognised you? Did anyone recognise you as the?
No one ever recognised me. No, ever. Well, it was fun, me and my mate Larry, who was a bit of a sort of a reformed villain, actually, had a shop in Crawford Street, and was at a market stall on Church Street off of Edgware Road, and that was fun. We do house clearances. We go down Brick Lane, picking up, the early bird catching the worm, but the worm usually turned out to be, stolen goods as it happened. That's where they'd unload all the stuff, the small stuff. But before that, they drove the bigger stuff over to the continent, on the overnight ferry. It was fun. I mean, I really enjoyed it. But a year of that was enough for me, and I really had to get back to music. I was trying to think of something to do that wasn't music for a while. Again, I think it's just burnout,
Right.
And everything had changed, hadn't it? I mean, you talk about, Bohemian Rhapsody, and there was The Damned, it was disco, and the charts are full of records like Save Your Kisses for Me. And did you feel that that it might be harder to make your way in that market? I don't know.
Well, at the point where the book stops, I really did feel frustrated and thought, well, our audience has disappeared.
Yeah,
the old folkies of the 60s have actually, settled down. They've got kids now that they don't go out to gigs anymore. They don't seem to be buying any records either. What are we going to do? Are we going to go back to folk clubs? Maybe that's what we have to do right now, because the landscape had changed so much. And it was punk, which simultaneously was destroying folk music, was destroying the previous generation. But for me, it was also inspirational. So while the Sex Pistols were killing our career, they're also pointing the way forwards as far as I was concerned, because here was music that was, again, basic. And I thought not that different from, Elvis and the Sun sessions. It had a raw intensity, let's get back to that. But it took us a while to get back to that.
Right. The book ends with round about the death of Sandy Denny, which I think was actually 43 years ago today. I was reading somewhere.
Oh,
Which is an awful long time ago. Why does the book end there? And is there going to be another book? Questions.
Let me think. Well, I think the book ends there because I really didn't play much in 76. So there wasn't that much to write about. 77 to 80, I didn't feel that I liked the records that we made in that era, the Chrysalis albums that we did. And I didn't really want to write about them. It just seemed like negative. So I would have to pick it up again in 81, 82. And I thought that was too big a gap. So I thought, well, I'll just finish this here. If there's a volume 2, well, perhaps you pick it up in 81. The Tour from Hell, as it's popularly known, might be good subject matter, but maybe perhaps somebody else should write that one. Other books, I don't know. The nice thing about that period is it was very intense. And after that, the 80s, 90s, things got much more spread out. So you'd have to write about a much longer time period,
right,
to get the same number of pages as Beeswing.
Yeah.
But also all the drama happens, doesn't it? I suppose more drama in the 1960s and the early Fairport story.
Yeah, I think also because you're young, you're seeing things for the first time, and then make a much stronger impression on you. Once you played Scunthorpe for the 35th time, I'm not sure what you're going to write about unless someone gets murdered in the third row. What are you going to say about this repetitive nature of being on the road?
You got a song like Meat on the Ledge you write about, which is still very associated with you and with Fairport and the whole story. And you wrote that in a flat in, is it Brent?
Fabulous Brent, yes.
I think you write that you don't really know what it meant. It's only when you listen to it now that you hear what it means. Is that true?
I think it's true, yeah. I think a lot of creativity is, bordering on the unconscious. It's semi-conscious, and some songs are a little bit more conscious, and some songs are a little bit less conscious, and that one's a bit less. So I'm writing almost like automatically, stream of consciousness, if you like. And I sort of know what I'm saying, but I'm not sure what I'm saying. But I think the fact it's so vague contributes to the longevity of the song. The fact that people can put their own interpretation on it, and for some reason that song has become anthemic. They sing it every year at the Cropredy Festival. So it's kind of escaped me in a sense, and it escaped me quite early, and became public property. I couldn't go back and rewrite the verses. It's too late. It belongs to other people. It's people sing it at funerals. I had to sing it at my mother's funeral. That was really tough. So I can't argue that it means a lot to a lot of people, and I'm glad of that. But I can't say I wrote it with that intention.
Well, songs with a sense of mystery tend to last so much longer, don't they? People are
so,
still writing books about what Visions of Johanna means by Bob Dylan.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's not poetry, but you're just on the edge of poetry, where you can be kind of vague because it's telling the truth more than being truthful in a sense. If you state the facts, then you're missing the complexity of life. Whereas if you're poetic about it, then you're going beyond words. You're writing more about something that's unspeakable. So I think a good vague song like Visions of Johanna, if you like, enters that world where you can put your own interpretation, like your own spin on it.
Well, you must be very gratified by the response to the book.
Fantastic. I mean, it's done really well. This week coming up, we're number 3 in nonfiction on in the Sunday Times.
Oh, well, that's
staggering.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's so good, though. It's so good the way you write about music, the way you write about the internal dynamic of the band, the way you write about the world around you at the time. It's really original, really refreshing. Gosh, congratulations!
It's a miracle, that's all I can say.
And we must just mention Scott Timberg, who you wrote it with.
Yeah, Scott. I wouldn't have written it without Scott. Scott pushed me and shoved me for a couple of years. Scott Timberg, for people who don't know, was a wonderful journalist. Wrote for the LA Times for many years. Wrote for the LA Review of Books, and wrote some books about music as well. And so I finally said, okay, I'll do it, but you have to help me. How am I going to do this? He said, well, let's do interviews, and I'll transcribe them and clean them up a bit, and we'll see what happens. But I really didn't like the result of that. There was no voice. There's no kind of author's voice to it. So I thought, well, let me write it. And you can come in at the end of the process and shape it, But sadly, Scott passed away before that happened. So, I lost a good friend, and the world lost a fine writer.
Oh, well, that's very sad. There's the book, Rich Thompson, Beeswing, out now. You won't be traveling around bookshops to sign it because nobody's doing that at the moment.
Sadly, no, but there are many signed copies. I signed like thousands, so I hope you can get your hand on a signed one if you want it. Available
or a rare unsigned one. Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
Yeah. So signed ones are on eBay already for 100 quid.
Oh Lord. That's shocking. Well, congratulations, so good.
Richard, thanks very much.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.